Come on, louder. Yeah. I know, there was actually quite a lot to choose from. But it is, yes, the Chagos Islands. Woohoo! They are absolutely correct. So Keir Starmer has just handed over the sovereignty of Chagos, an archipelago of some 60 islands, to the Mauritians, who have no connection with them whatsoever, but have, however, been trying to get hold of them for decades. Cheers to that. Now, the islands were British territory until yesterday, and very strategic, as the Americans rent a military base on Diego Garcia, one of the islands. This is where I'm a little confused. In the deal, the British taxpayer will pay the Mauritians to take the island, and then an estimated figure of £101 million annually to rent it back, amounting to about £3.4 billion over 99 years, or that depends on basically how you calculate it. The true cost could possibly exceed £30 billion in real cash terms because of inflation and additional schemes to fund development projects in Mauritius. So we have basically just paid to give away a strategic piece of sovereign British territory so that we can rent it back. Hey! Hey! Keir Starmer has to be the worst deal maker ever. And whilst the Tories did open up the negotiations, James cleverly, wisely parked the idea. Even the backstabbing, squabbling, work-shy, busted-flussed Tories decided that it was a no-go. Although, why they even bothered looking into this when they frankly had more pressing issues under their watch to deal with, who knows? So, why is Sir Keir Starmer doing this?
If we did not agree this deal, the legal situation would mean that we would not be able to prevent China or any other nation setting up their own bases on the outer islands or carrying out joint exercises near our base. We would have to explain to you, the British people, and to our allies that we'd lost control of this vital asset. No responsible government could let that happen. So there's no alternative but to act in Britain's national interest.
Of course, of course, of course. And when pressed by our very own Catherine Forster,
you say to people who can't understand why you can find 100 million a year, billions over 99 years, but you can't find money to support people with disabilities. And you were a human rights lawyer. You're having to make this deal because of an international legal ruling. But the Chagosians that brought that case last night, that got that temporary injunction, feel that it breaches their human rights, and they're being treated just as shoddily as when the government booted them out of the Chagos Islands back in the 60s.
His answer?
Let me take all three parts of that question. In answer to your first question, the answer is the first duty of a Prime Minister is to keep the country safe and secure. And this base is vital in that respect. Its location, its physical use, and its capability, including the spectrum capability.
Think after all that, then you'd keep them. So 3 minutes of this and still no concrete response. It was a bit like PMQ's, Prime Minister's questions, no answers. I can only hazard a guess that some people are doing very nicely out of this deal, like Philippe Sands KC, an international lawyer who played a pivotal role in advocating for the Mauritians' unfounded claim to the islands, and he's understood to be close to Sir Keir Starmer. And if he does have a close relationship with Starmer, could that have influenced the Prime Minister into agreeing to this awful deal? And let's not forget politicians on the other side of this deal. Ex-Mauritian Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth, often referred to as the architect of the archipelago's deal. He was arrested last weekend when anti-corruption police seized suitcases of allegedly containing about 2.4 million in local and foreign currencies, 7 luxury watches and UK visas. Of course, he denies the charges against him. Does any of this sound a bit fishy to you? Don't get me started on the fish, another Great British giveaway. Right, we've got a question. Let's take a question from Mark. Where's Mark?
Right over here at the end. If I can, I'd like to start with a comparison. In 1982, there were a group of islands thousands of miles away that wanted to remain British when they were overridden by the Argentinian junta. We went out there, we sent entire battle fleets down there and fought the Falklands War. We now have another group of islands whose residents still want to pray and say British. And we are selling the land out, giving away the land from under their feet. Is there any comparison in the last 50 years that's actually made this happen?
Let's go to Barry Gardner. Barry.
Well, I love the way, Nana, in which you've presented this in such an unbiased and objective fashion. That's the first thing I have to say. But look, let's actually try and establish some facts. You said that Mauritius had no connection to the Chagos Islands. Well, actually, the Chagos Islands were part of Mauritius until 1965, when we, the British, separated them from Mauritius, right? We then, 3 years later, gave Mauritius its independence. So the idea that there was never any connection here is complete nonsense. Now, sir, you talked about the residents of the Chagos archipelago. There aren't any. There are some people whose grandparents, some parents, but mostly grandparents, now live in Britain, who were those grandparents resident in the Chagos Islands, but there are no residents at the moment. Now, they disagree very much with the Chagosian descendants who actually live in Mauritius, okay? So you can listen to one or you can listen to the other. But the thing that we have to listen to is not just the International Court of Justice, and I know that that will create resounding boos in the audience, so please, come on. There you go, right? Never say I didn't work for you here, right? But the key point is there was also a binding legal judgment, because the International Court of Justice was not binding, but there was a binding legal judgment which was ITLOS, and that's the International Law of the Sea. And that was a judgment in 2022, and that's what actually prompted the Conservative government to engage in this whole business, because we are bound to recognise that actually it isn't ours. We had no right to separate them off because they were never asked about separating off, and so legally it remains part of Mauritius. Now, I am against the deal for other reasons. Okay, and I've always said that. I'm against the deal because you have here, 15 years ago, I was one of those who campaigned to have that whole area turned into a marine conservation area, a marine protected area, because it's some of the most amazing corals, some of the most amazing biodiversity in the world in there. And it's really important that we preserve those coral reefs. So we created a no fishing zone around it. My concern about this deal is not the defence, because actually this is going to cost less than one aircraft carrier without the aircraft, right? It's pittance in terms of defence, and it's a vital strategic interest.
Yes, but
what I'm concerned about is actually the marine biodiversity, because Mauritius was one of the countries that applied for fishing licences in that area, and that's what I'm worried about, because it could destroy those reefs, and that is really important for the ocean and all the communities who live around it.
Can we look at it from a real common sense point? Why are we giving away this land and then renting back one part of it?
We're not giving it away. We're not giving it away because it was never ours.
Oh, come on, Barry. Come on, Barry.
It was ours since 1814. Before that, it was briefly French from 1793.
And it got its independence in 68.
Give Jane a chance to speak now.
Uninhabited. We administrated the Chagos Islands from Mauritius, but they were not the same country. They were very separate. The Chagosians now, who we do owe a bit of a sort of apology to for, displacing them. They want to be British. They're very proudly British. And yesterday we heard Miss Lee Mandarin on GB News speak with such passion. He's a Chagosian and a very proud Brit. And I've been lucky enough to go to the Falkland Islands and see that pride that our British Overseas Territories has. And I wish our Prime Minister had a hint of that pride. But I want to ask Barry, if Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak, if one of their closest friends had been paid by Mauritius for over 10 years to get the Chagos Islands for Mauritius, and suddenly his busy mate's in number 10 and it happens, what would Labour be saying?
And look,
They would be screaming blue murder.
We know what Barry and them would say.
It looks
complete
stinky.
nonsense, because what you're talking about is engaging a lawyer. If you happen to have a friend who's a lawyer, lawyers work for
All his friends are
all
lawyers.
sorts of dodgy people. That's what lawyers do, right?
So what are you saying? I think you should quit whilst you're ahead. Really, I would if I were you. Listen, I love the fact that
I'm
Barry's
glad you
concerned.
acknowledge I'm ahead. That's great.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Barry was more concerned about the fish than the actual Chagosians. Adam Brooks.
Look, the gentleman there mentioned the Falklands. At the time when that happened, we had a true hero as our leader, Margaret Thatcher. At the moment, we have got, in my opinion, a coward and a fraud who is selling out British territory for whatever reasons he's doing it. For me, the analogy is like me giving away my garden shed to a friend and then paying my friend to use my own garden shed. At the end of the day, that would just be madness. As Barry said, the ICJ is non-binding. We are not due to do this at all. There is no pressure for us to do this. No one can take these islands. No one can take these islands off us. If it goes to an assembly, we've got veto powers. It makes no sense. And the British public now are waking up to corruption and, idiots. Incompetence in politics. And to me, this deal makes no sense at all. And, I won't have it. I won't have it.
Yeah, I think that this story, it's all about the context and the reasons that it's actually happening. Because the context is one in which Britain is just not in a good place financially, culturally, socially. Obviously we heard from GB News' correspondent that this money could be used to fund other things because people are struggling at the moment, whether that's winter fuel or whatever else. I mean, obviously this is defence spending, presumably, so it could be used to fund, ammunition, for example, because if the United Kingdom was to go to war, we would run out of ammunition within a week, which is not ideal, right?
Do you think we'd last a week? I don't think we would. A couple of days, probably.
That's a very good point. This fact that we're going to be sending them £101 million annually for the next 99 years does seem pretty, pretty silly. But at the same time, I'm not so taken with the arguments that this is just a completely ridiculous plan, in its totality. Because I do think that, is it in the interest of ordinary British people that we have this, that we have this sort of essentially colony when most of the sort of, planes and military equipment on the base is American, for one thing. So it's almost like an American outpost that we're paying for. If the Americans want it that badly, they can be the ones to pay for it.
But they rent it from us, so they pay us to look after it. So at a time when the government are talking about a £22 billion black hole, at a time when they are taking money off pensioners, off farmers, off anybody else, I think, is anybody else they haven't taken money off?
No.
To say that they're trying to plug a hole that left to them by the Tories. The last thing that you would do is then make an even greater hole.
And so if the reason was, if Starmer was giving the reason of something like, look, Britain's not in a great place economically, I'm going to try and get a good deal from the Americans because this is theirs to defend if they want it, and put that money back into Britain, then I'd understand it. But it's the way that it's been done, where, as you said, we're going to be renting this place back.
Can I just put in something, because Adam was absolutely right. The ICJ judgment is not binding. The ITLOS judgment is. Now, the difficulty is this. China is creating little islands. It's actually going out to atolls and pouring concrete down to create its own extended shoreline, because obviously you've got the 200 miles out from the end of your territory. And they're doing that for very good strategic military reasons, because they want to claim that part of the ocean, stop American or UK vessels going into those waters. Now, the reason it's so important that we abide by the ITLOS judgment is we can't put the finger on China for doing what it's doing that's wrong if we're also in violation of international law.
Not yesterday. John Healey could not answer questions on this yesterday in the chamber.
But I can.
Didn't watch it. And today, Russia and Mauritius have signed a deal to strengthen marine research.
The people who want this deal are China and Russia.
Nonsense.
Sorry, they do. They've supported them. They've supported the
Barry,
the
why would we...
The people who are against it are the US, Australia, the UK, New Zealand, our friends and our strategic allies. What you've got to ask yourself is, why would the US Australia, New Zealand all think that this was the right thing to do, support this deal, and the Chinese and the Russians be against it if, in fact, it were not in Britain's strategic
Barry.
All right,
interest?
we're going to leave it on
It
that
is.
cliffhanger.